Marcus Aurelius is the anti-Nero in many ways, the one man who clung to his moral principles even in spite of immense duress, immense pressure, and the other who collapsed really as soon as the opportunity for wrongdoing came around.
Today's guest, James Romm. We're talking in this episode about why philosophers shouldn't just be writers, they should be doers, and yet the tension of being a doer in an imperfect world. We talk about Seneca's letters and Plato's letters and many more things.
The place of Stoicism in the heart of the Roman Empire, in the palace, the fact that it later got banished from the palace as a threat to imperial power. Nero started off on a relatively good path.
Is it that power is itself kind of a mental illness?
In his case, very much so. The freedom to do anything, to have whatever pleasures he wanted, to kill his mother or whoever else he wanted, those would drive many human beings into delusion and insanity.
What's so remarkable about Marcus Aurelius in Meditations is that he'd probably be mortified that we're reading it. It's like we're catching him singing in the shower, and it turns out he's got a beautiful voice.
Marcus has really gripped the imagination, I think in part because
I've been saying in some of my talks, I think when we think of antiquity, we think of the past, we think of it as kind of stable or even peaceful. Like we think of Socrates in the golden age of Athens or whatever. And then you go, well, actually Socrates lived in the middle of a great power conflict through essentially a world war. Then in the time of the 30 tyrants, Plato lives through not just a good chunk of that, but also, as you talk about in the new book, sort of tyrants all over. Seneca lives in the time of Nero. The sort of peacefulness of it is an illusion. They would have lived in what they thought were scary, unstable times.
Yeah, very much so. And that's really what the Republic is all about, trying to stop things from changing.
Yes.
From going downhill.
Yeah, and they would have gotten together and been like, can you believe what so-and-so, like they would have been doing the same sort of political gossip that we do. They would have had the concern and the anxiety that we have. This sort of the same human phenomenon of like, this is crazy, what are we doing, would have been there in the ancient world too.
Yeah, absolutely. For a lot of people, life was very precarious. A loss in combat could mean your city's wiped off the map. I mean,
yeah, you could be sold into slavery.
Yeah. I mean, the chances of total disaster were very high.
Yes.
For a lot of people.
Yeah, in the way that we think like, this could lead to a recession. They're thinking, it could lead to all the men in our society being murdered.
Yeah, exactly right. Yes, that happened on many occasions.
Yes, and they were as powerless to do that much about it as we are. You know what I mean? Like it's this sort of existential dread and terror that must just be part of the human condition.
Well, at the same time, they had a lot more control, I guess you could say, in that, if you fielded a strong army or if you had strong fortifications or if your community was really unified.
I just mean the average citizen.
The average citizen.
Just the average person is, I hope we get it together, otherwise it's going to be bad for me. That sort of thing that we're all thinking now. Just that, like, you can do your part, you can vote, you can have your opinions, you can know what should be, but will society get its act together and stave off disaster is sort of just a timeless part of human society.
Yeah. Yep. Questions we're facing right now, as you say.
Yeah.
And by the way, I very much admire your own stand in the recent dust-up with the Naval Academy and all that, and your, communications about it.
Thanks.
We have to stand up.
We do. Well, I was thinking one of the indictments you could say about modern society is that, like, when was it Domitian, he bans all the philosophers, right? There was this point where philosophy was transgressive and largely at odds with the powers that be. This is why Epictetus is banished. Philosophy is controversial. And I was thinking that it says something about us today that I'm not sure they're exactly coming for the philosophers anymore because they don't have that much influence. And then I read another op-ed after mine where Graham Parsons, who's a professor at West Point, resigned. He's a philosophy professor, and he resigned and then was condemned by the Secretary of Defense. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's not good. But on the other hand, it is good to see philosophy in the mix. Like it should be in the mix, and it should be sort of debating and challenging the powers that be. Otherwise, what good is it? It's just sort of debating abstractions.
Exactly. Which is exactly what Plato was afraid of, that if he didn't go to Syracuse, didn't try to influence an actual regime in power, that he would be accused of being all talk and no action. And that was one of his main motives for making the first journey and the two subsequent journeys.
Yeah, it's like a good intention that leads to a bad spot.
Yeah, exactly. The road to hell.
Yes, right, because philosophers shouldn't be just writers, they should be doers. Mm-hmm. And maybe this is what leads Seneca astray too, is he wants to be in the room where it happens, mm-hmm. and loses his bearings as to when one should leave the room where it's happening. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I know that you have the two books there.
You can see I took a few notes on this one.
Yeah, they're very parallel stories.
Yes. Uh-huh. And it's a fine line, I guess, between wanting to be a doer and not just a talker, and then when is your ego leading you into a bad place.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And when do things get so messy that you have to extricate yourself? Seneca tried to extricate himself but failed.
Yes.
And Plato succeeded, but then had to answer all kinds of questions about what went wrong, why did he bail, and the disaster that he left behind became much worse after his departure. So, yeah, things got very sticky.
Well, I have this quote that I think is sort of, it strikes me as maybe the sort of through line of both your books, but I had this on my desk. I don't know when or why I wrote it down. But Pompey's last words, where he quotes Sophocles, he says, "Whoever makes his journey to a tyrant's court becomes his slave, although he went there a free man." Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so you think you're going to do good work for a flawed person, or that you're going to be above the industry that you're working in, right? Because most of us aren't going to go work for actual emperors or kings. But you think you can go into that place and not get your hands dirty, mm-hmm. but you can't.
Right. Exactly. The philosopher has ideal notions of what politics is about as the republic. I mean, the republic enshrines those ideals in the highest way. And then when you hit the ground splattering,
yes.
as it were, things don't work out so neatly.
So for Seneca, it's fascinating to me because obviously Nero doesn't start out as a tyrant. Right. His mother is obviously flawed, and maybe you could have said he could have seen it coming. But with Seneca, it seems much more like a frog in a pot. Like the heat is slowly being turned up, and then he's in that space where they say it's very hard to see something that your salary depends on you not seeing. Mm-hmm. And he can't get out.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right. Yeah, Nero started off on a relatively good path. The first 5 years of his reign were later referred to as the Quinquennium Neronis, the best time of the Roman Empire. It wasn't until he became he approached his 20s and had he was well into his 20s after 5 years, and more gumption, more autonomy, and took the reins into his own hands more. And then things started to really crash.
Yeah, and is it mental illness, or is it what power? Is it that power is itself kind of a mental illness?
In his case, very much so. The freedom to do anything, to have whatever pleasures he wanted, to kill his mother or whoever else he wanted, have the Praetorian Guard at his beck and call, those would drive many human beings into delusions and insanity. And in his case, he was already a little shaky to begin with, so it just sort of exaggerated his natural flaws.
I think there's an interesting contrast, right? Because so both Marcus Aurelius and Nero are not born to be emperor. They're sort of, through an odd series of machinations, get chosen for it. Both get introduced to philosophy and philosophers pretty early, and there is this sense that the job will be hard and that they need to be philosophical. So they're both trained in Stoic philosophy. Marcus Aurelius by Junius Rusticus, Nero by Seneca himself, and it goes in very different directions.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Marcus Aurelius is the anti-Nero in many ways. And what's ironic is that his teachers had all learned from Epictetus, who had been present at the court of Nero and had probably seen the disaster with Seneca. So there is a direct line of transmission, really, from Seneca to Marcus. But the two of them are very distinct. And of course, Nero and Marcus are just antithetical. The one man who clung to his moral principles, even in spite of immense duress, immense pressure, and the other who collapsed really as soon as the opportunity for wrongdoing came around.
And I wonder how much the swing vote is their mother. Because, here, let's see if I would not be good if I fell out of this chair. What does he say about his mother? Marcus's description of his mother is her reverence for the divine, her generosity, her inability not only to not do wrong, but to even conceive of doing it, in the simple way she lived, not in the least like the rich. That's basically the opposite of Nero's mother.
Yes, right.
And so maybe that's the swing vote.
That could be, yes, the parentage. And of course, Nero also lacked a father.
But so did Marcus.
Well, Marcus was adopted and had a very positive role model to look up to in Antoninus. The problem of Nero being fatherless for really his first 13 years, and then having Seneca as a surrogate father, who at that point was already, almost 2 generations older and not a very paternal type, I don't think, never had children of his own. So, parenting was a big dividing line for those two.
Yeah, that's interesting because Marcus is attached to Antoninus, and Hadrian probably thinks he's going to live for a few more years, and he lives for like 20 years. And Marcus actually takes to this apprenticeship and decides, like, I don't want to be emperor right away. I'm fine being the number 2. And Nero is basically, that's what Seneca is set up to be, although he's not made emperor himself. And Nero listens to him for a little bit and then stops. And I always come back to that famous bronze statue of Seneca and Nero sitting together. And obviously it's not of the time, but you can see in Nero's body language some sense of what it would actually be like to have access to the potentially the wisest man of your time and think you know more, or not be interested in hearing from them.
Yes, or to actively reject what he's telling you. The problem of Nero's love life right from the get-go divided Seneca and Nero, because Seneca wanted to defend the legitimate wife, Octavia, who represented the stability of the empire, the future dynasty, and the union of the 2 branches of the royal family. And Nero didn't want anything to do with that.
Yes.
He wanted the hottie.
It's at some level, no one can tell the emperor what to do. But Marcus Aurelius is bound by some sense of tradition or honor or norms. And then I would say the philosophy itself, like the philosophy is telling him, like Epictetus is telling Marcus what to do, in that he has sort of laid down these precepts or these sort of ideals to aspire to. And Nero has none of that. And one of them spins off the planet and the other doesn't.
Yeah, it's a fascinating study. The place of Stoicism in the heart of the Roman Empire, in the palace, and the fact that it later got banished from the palace as a threat to imperial power. That too is part of the story. You mentioned Domitian and the exile
Yes.
of the philosophers from the royal court. At that point, it had been determined that Stoicism could not get along, could not be incorporated into the power structure.
Look, it would be great if you could just get all the nutrients you needed from your diet alone. But when we're talking about elite performance, by definition, we're talking about getting to a kind of an extra level. And one of the most essential nutrients your body and your brain needs is creatine. It supports strength and power and recovery. It even supports memory and mental sharpness. Whether you're a writer or a knowledge worker, it's something that can help you be better at what you do. And Momentus's new creatine lemon delivers some of the purest creatine on the planet. CreaPure is a naturally flavored lemonade-style powder. Comes in on-the-go travel packs. You mix it into water so you can take it wherever you are, which for me is on the road sometimes, rushing out of the house to take my kids to school. I'm at the office. I forgot to do it at home. And they back it with science and transparency and trust. If you've been curious about creatine, you should check out Momentus. Just head over to livemomentus.com and use the code STOIC for up to 35% off your first order. That's code STOIC at livemomentus.com. That time of Nero is so interesting because you have all these different kind of Stoic characters, and they each sort of show us a different way that you respond to tyranny or dysfunction or corruption. So you have someone like Agrippinus, who's kind of this, like, marches to the beat of his own drummer. He says, I want to be the red thread in the white sweater. You have Epictetus, who's sort of powerless inside of it and just trying to focus internally, just how do I find freedom within myself when I am literally, in chains. Then you have Seneca, who's the collaborator, it's sort of mitigator, martyr type. Mm-hmm. And then you have a Thracian. You have these other ones who are sort of more aggressively rebellious and revolutionary, I guess. And I mean, they all end up effectively in the same place. I guess the Stoics would say it doesn't matter. Like they all end up not making it out alive. Mm-hmm. But there's these sort of different paths that you can follow, and then it's sort of left to us all these thousands of years later to say, like, which role do you want to play?
Yes, very true. And it's interesting that Marcus has become sort of our primary touchstone for Roman Stoicism, and by far more popular, more widely read than either Seneca or Epictetus, and certainly more so than the other minor figures. Marcus has really gripped the imagination, I think in part because of his royal power, because he was able to resist the pull into hedonism, into vice, into family murder. Of course, he did some bad things.
Yes.
Let's not.
We still grade him on a curve, though.
We grade him on a curve, yes, very much so. And compared to the things he could have done,
yes,
and that Nero did, he comes out looking pretty good.
Yeah. It's weird to give him credit for not murdering his mother.
Yes.
But right. That was, or I think there's that scene where Hadrian gets mad at a secretary and he stabs him in the eye with a stylus. Mm-hmm. And this is just like, oh, that's what happens when the emperor gets mad. Mm-hmm. And so it's almost incomprehensible to go like, okay, that's the world that Marcus lived in. That's how he could have acted. That's how he saw his predecessor act. Mm-hmm. And then so you have to go, wow, it's pretty remarkable that you were not anywhere close to as monstrous.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, I mean, on the column of Marcus Aurelius in Rome, you see butchery, yes, of the highest caliber, people presenting severed heads to Marcus as trophies. And, that was the reality of the war he was conducting against the Marcomanni at the time he was writing the Meditations.
Yes.
So we have to hold those two things together somehow in our minds. But nevertheless, the Meditations remains a hugely inspiring work. And I think it's partly because of its internal quality, the fact that he's addressing these thoughts to himself.
Yes.
He's not writing to a public the way that Seneca is, or preaching the way that Epictetus is. He's really recording these thoughts for his own internal spiritual exercise.
Yeah.
And that's very much what a lot of people are doing with Stoicism today. And, you know, a lot of your work, the Daily Stoic and so on, is giving people tools to do that, to develop their core.
It's probably unique amongst philosophical texts, certainly all books, in that it wasn't written for publication. And so there's no performative element in it.
Right.
And your book, it sort of pierces that bubble. It's hard to read Seneca the same way once you read your book, and once you know the context and the stuff, once you realize, oh, this is him wanting to be seen as Stoic. Mm-hmm. What's so remarkable about Marcus Aurelius and Meditations is that he'd probably be mortified that we're reading it. Mm-hmm. And so that it comes off as Stoic there is really a clue that he must have been that way internally. It's like we're catching him singing in the shower, and it turns out he's got a beautiful voice.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a good analogy. Of course, one could be a cynic and say he presented it in the guise of a diary or a personal journal, but it really was not. But I take him at his word that the title is sometimes given to himself.
Yes.
The title Meditations is a modern invention. So, I believe in that.
I suspect at some level there was a little bit of a, well, I hope, maybe someone will see this someday, because the writing is so beautiful. Mm-hmm. It is, again, in the masterwork of prose, which makes it all the more impressive if it wasn't written for publication. At the same time, if it was for publication, you wouldn't start so many sentences in the middle of a sentence. Like it's extra masterful if there's this meta level of, I'm intending this for publication, but I want it to be seen as a private diary. Mm-hmm. That almost makes it more impressive that he could pull it off for 2,000 years.
Yes, and that's a very unlikely scenario.
Yeah.
And that actually corresponds fairly closely to my argument for accepting the letters of Plato in my book, Plato and the Tyrant, as legitimate writings of Plato, even though some scholars dismiss them as fakes.
Yeah.
That you have to assume, if it were a fake, that someone with incredible literary talent and a genius for impersonation and no discernible motive except to deceive people created them.
Yes.
And that is just an unlikely scenario. It's much, much more credible to think that they are the writings of Plato, and thus I use them as my evidence in the book.
Well, it's an interesting modern analog to this, and this is funny. So this was Joan Didion's table.
Really?
Yes, and the chairs too. And so I don't know if you saw this new book that they just published.
No.
So her estate, they found after her death a stack of papers bound in an envelope or in a manila folder next to her desk that were the notes that she had typed up every week after her appointments with her therapist. And they were addressed to John, her husband, and she was dealing with her own issues, but she was primarily dealing with her daughter's descent into alcoholism and the family's struggle to try to keep her safe and keep her sober and not be codependent and not, just all the horrendous, vexing decisions that you would make as a parent of an adult child who's struggling. And there are these typewritten notes set, in a folder next to her desk addressed to her husband, and they just published them. And there's this debate about whether she would want them to be published, whether she wrote them with an eye to them being published, which I think is interesting. And then if you read them, it's riveting and beautiful and almost like an epistolary novel. And I think that's partly because someone that talented can't, I'm sure her to-do list was well written. She's just so good at it. Uh-huh. But even if it was privately written for her husband and she never wanted it to be read, I think there must have been some other part of her that is inherently a performer and an artist and is trying to do it well. And then, I'm sure as you were getting up in age and you'd be cognizant of what you were leaving in an envelope next to your desk where you did your work. But it is interesting to have this glimpse into someone's unaffected private struggle. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what Meditations is. Because we also don't know how it was organized. Mm-hmm. We don't know if there was stuff excised in or out of it. Mm-hmm. We don't know if it was Like, is this the work he did over 20 years? Is this 2 months? You know, that would change how you think about it too, right? Was this him editing and rewriting, or was this just what is this just what he needed over a 2-month period of his life? And then with the last meditation being effectively him saying goodbye to life, is he writing it like as he's dying of the plague, or did he write it years before and then someone put it there? It's infinitely fascinating just as a literary, device.
Yeah, to try to reconstruct the circumstances. And the same is true of the letters of Plato,
yes,
which are also first-person documents that Plato probably never imagined would be read many centuries after his death. That and in one case, a private letter that he didn't imagine would be read by anyone except the recipient. And by some miracle, we have them today, and they give us insight into Plato that we don't get from his dialogues. We don't ever hear him speaking in a first-person voice.
And is that very different than Seneca's letters?
Very different. Seneca's letters, although they're addressed to Lucilius, theoretically they're a private communique. They undoubtedly were written with the public in mind and widely circulated. And many people feel it was a fiction that there was even a communication with Lucilius, that there was no two-way exchange of letters. It was just Seneca creating a fiction of a correspondence.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is he like a modern writer writing to educate an audience, or is he more like a propagandist trying to portray something about himself?
I think it's a mixture of the two, but I would put the emphasis on the latter, that he's at the end of his life. He doesn't know yet that it's the end of his life, but he's in his 60s. He's been serving Nero for 15 years, and things have been going steadily downhill. And he's aware that his reputation is badly sullied. At the same time, he's trying to extricate himself from politics. So this is sort of his apologia pro vita sua, right? He wants his life to be seen in a certain perspective, a positive one. And so he creates this philosophical self-portrait at the end of his life.
This is a Kissinger type, writing books about history or whatever to sort of launder the reputation.
Launder and also present the best side of himself, where a lot of Rome had seen a worse side.
Today, if you served a corrupt or corrosive regime, you would write a tell-all where you act as if you've been opposed to this all along and you made it less bad, and you would spill all the secrets. You do a confessional sort of memoir tell-all.
Yeah.
But Seneca can't do that.
That's right. That's right. So he chooses the letter genre, which is exactly what Plato did as well, because 12 of his 13 letters, well, one we know is a fake, but the majority of his 13 letters are public letters written for public consumption and widely circulated. And those two, especially the 7th letter, which is by far the biggest and longest, are efforts at spin control.
Yes.
Yeah.
So again, the timelessness of, like, we think some of these things are just kind of modern inventions of media culture, but like people have been doing it for 2,000 years.
Exactly. Yes. The need to present an image, to craft an image, which of course was perfected by Alexander the Great, the generation after Plato, but Plato was already working hard at it in the middle of the 4th century BC.
Well, the Kissinger thing is interesting because I'm reading and writing about Vietnam right now, and just that this guy's writing a book about AI, like right before he died. He published a book with, I think, Eric Schmidt or something. And just this guy that effectively killed hundreds of thousands of people, treasonously prolonged a war, just like one of the worst of the worst, right? As time passes, some of that you lose track of, and you're like, oh, he wrote some interesting things about, the future of technology. And you just kind of go, oh, that's a playbook, I guess.
Yes. With public political figures, one can never draw a fine line between what's their authentic philosophy or their authentic point of view and what is crafted for public consumption.
So is that a type, you think, that gets, like, does politics turn you into that person, or is it that those people are attracted to politics?
That's a great question, especially a pressing question in Plato's case, because he had never thought of himself as a political player, and he'd never been involved in politics until he went to Syracuse. And he's at great pains to explain his motives for going there as non-political, that he didn't want to meddle in the rulership of Syracuse. He wanted to, A, protect his protege, Ddion, and B, convince people that he was not all talk and no action, that he had enough conviction in his beliefs to try to act on them. But he went reluctantly, he says, and he got out as soon as he could. So, I think in Plato's case, it's especially that he was not naturally interested or certainly adept at politics, and his participation there bears that out because it became a disaster very quickly.
Yeah, there's like a sort of, you would think that they would be really good at reading people, but there's kind of a lack of savviness, like an inability to see what is so obviously a flaw in someone's character or approach. Or maybe it's an ability to be persuaded in the room. There's a line in Meditations where Marcus Aurelius thanks his philosophy teacher for teaching him not to fall for every smooth talker. And then you think Aristotle falls for Alexander, Plato falls, Seneca certainly falls. There is this seduction that happens, and it's almost not it's not the seduction in the way that those tyrants seduced everyone else, which is I'll make you rich and famous and powerful. It's almost another level of it where it's like, this person's flawed, I can see that, and I'm not going to be one of the enablers. I'm not going to be one of the low. I'm going to be above them, using them for my purposes, or that I can reform them, or I can control and contain them in a way that other people can't.
Right. And in Plato's case, the seduction was that if he could convert a young man to philosophy, so Dionysius the Younger at the time when Plato arrived at his court was only 30. Yeah. Plato was already in his 50s. And if he says in his letter, if I could convince this one man to follow philosophy, that would start a chain reaction that might save the whole human race.
Yes.
So the grandiosity of that, I mean, it's off the charts.
That's what I was going to say. It's this sort of martyrdom grandiosity sort of thing that's happening where I don't want to do this. It's going to be hard for me to do this. It might end badly for me to do it. But also, I alone can fix it. I am the last line of defense. And it almost never ends well. And it, in retrospect, is clear that they enabled that person far more than they constrained that person.
Yeah. True. Now, in Plato's defense, you could argue that he had seen enough of the disasters of Athens by the time he went to Syracuse that he could legitimately think that democracy was failing, other systems of governance were failing, Greece was falling apart, was deteriorating rapidly, economic life was going downhill, and something had to be done to stop the slide.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Seneca's making the same bet. He idealizes Cato, but he's like, that Rome is gone. We've got an emperor now. It's my job to make the emperor not as bad as they might otherwise be.
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen this in our own times, people who've attached themselves to recent presidents and current presidents have thought, I can at least mitigate the harm.
I can snatch papers from the desk.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I can stop the worst things from happening, and that justifies my participation, even though I'll be forced to collude with things I really don't believe in.
Yes. Well, I read Dying Every Day when I was at American Apparel. I had come back. They'd fired the CEO, and they were trying to save the company. And I was sort of wrestling with a much more minor version of the same sort of temptations. It was thinking back to how had this person who was sort of unstable and reckless and made all these terrible decisions, how at every step of the way had he managed to convince the smartest people to give him more and more money. And there is just, and I think it's fascinating that sort of after everything, Trump managed to go to Silicon Valley and convince these people who are primarily a venture capitalist. Your job is, most of the ideas turn out to not be good. Your job is to bet on founder. Like their job is to read people and see which person is worth giving millions and millions of dollars to and can successfully build and run a company. And Trump manages to convince them that he's not what he obviously is. And then promptly, tanks the economy doing exactly what he said he was going to do. And these same people are like, we didn't think he would actually do it, right? And I think that's the timelessness of the seduction, which is like, over here I'm saying and showing you this. And then over here I'm saying something different. And the human capacity to hear which one of those we want to hear.
Yeah. And for Plato to have gone back to the court of Dionysius a second time, 5 years after departing in a terrible debacle the first time and having caused a rift in the royal family that resulted in his protege Ddion getting exiled, that is really, it's another stunning example of self-deception.
Yeah, the mental gymnastics that humans are capable of will never cease to surprise you.
That's right. And Plato says that he devised a test. This is really a testament to his naivete. He devised a test to see whether Dionysius was a suitable student, that he was going to tell him exactly how hard it was going to be to become a philosopher.
Yeah.
And probably he had in mind years and years of study, starting with geometry and astronomy and higher math and going up to dialectic. And he was going to see how he would react. Yeah. So he lands in Syracuse for the second time, the third time, but the second time under Dionysius the Younger, and presents him with this scenario. And Dionysius says, oh, well, I already know all this stuff because other people have told it to me. And at that point, Plato is sort of done.
Yeah.
But the fact that after having lived with him 5 years earlier for months and months and seeing exactly what kind of person he was, a drunk, a libertine, unstable, emotional figure, that he still thought, well, maybe he'll pass the test and I'll have a true student on my hands.
Yeah. I imagine Seneca, he's somewhere in one of his villas and the messenger rushes in, we have news that, Nero's tried to kill his mother. and Seneca's grabbing his toga, and rushing over to the palace. I'm going to tell him this time, it's good. This has to end. You can't do this. Like, I'm really going to confront him. This is it. It's like, we're going to have the come to Jesus conversation, which maybe he literally could have used that expression.
That's right.
Jesus having overlapped with Seneca. But we're going to have it. And he's walking there. I'm going to confront him. I'm laying it on the line. I'm giving him the ultimatum. And then by the end of it, Nero has talked himself out of it, right? And then soon enough, he does kill his mother and crosses the next red line and crosses the next red line. And the real skill of the Neros, of the tyrants, of the Trumps, etc., is their ability to read those people and to know what they have to say to them and what their levers are and how to manipulate them. That at some level they see through them and they know how to get them in their pocket.
Yeah. There's a great phrase that James Comey used in the first Trump administration. He eats your soul in little bites.
Oh.
That was a description of what he saw going on in those closed rooms where people were, huddled with the decision maker.
Yeah, because didn't he say, like, the first day they all get called into his office and Trump basically forces them to all say that it was the biggest inauguration crowd that they'd ever seen. And that's really the test, is like, can I get you to accept an absurd premise? And if I can, then what you have told me is, I think people think it's about loyalty, but it's more about you have shown me a glimpse into your soul, which is that you want the job more than you care about your principles or notions like the truth and honesty, etc. And if I can get you to make that little compromise, or if I can get you to show me that that's who you are, then this is going to go well.
Yeah, very true. And Nero had a similar test with the murder of his mother, that he put out a story that his mother had been conspiring against the regime and was an enemy to the regime and had to be eliminated on that grounds. And Seneca wrote the letter in which that was put forward to the Senate. And Tacitus says, no one blamed Nero because they knew he was a rotten apple, but everyone thought Seneca had just gone to the dogs.
Yeah, so then later when Seneca says, I'll give you all my money, I want to leave. Nero goes, no, you don't. Like Nero knows. Nero knows, not only has he actually compromised him, and he knows where the bodies are buried, literally, but he knows that Seneca is corruptible and ambitious above anything else.
Well, I mean, we should give Seneca at least the credit for saying he wanted to leave.
Sure, that was courageous.
And then withdrawing from the court into a kind of private, his private chambers, pretending to be sick, according to Tacitus, and not going out in public with the emperor. So he at least had enough self-respect to distance himself.
Yes,
if not remove himself.
It's too little, too late, but it still happened, and it didn't happen for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we'll see the same. In our current band of followers. There will be some who will eventually say, I can't go on with this. It's too much.
Yes.
And we'll have to. Well, Mike Pence.
Yeah.
Take the example of Mike Pence. Went along. Finally, there was a bridge too far. And of
literal insurrection.
Yeah, right.
That's where I draw the line.
Yeah. And now, we hail him as a hero of conscience, or some do.
Well, Nero does that test multiple times, right? He cheats his way into the Olympics. And, I think some people think it must have been absurd vanity. And I think at some level, there is some kind of intuitive understanding of like, what can I get people to accept? And then he does this, doesn't he? He like murders his wife, and then he says like, no, my boyfriend is my wife, right? This is her all along. And you've got Thrasea, basically Seneca's opposite in every way as a Stoic, goes, no, like he refuses to say what is demonstrably untrue. Like he just refuses to rubber stamp an outright farce, which again doesn't seem like much, but most of the Senate goes along with it. And so it's this kind of, how can I get you to slowly compromise yourself so then you are too compromised to challenge me when it matters?
Yeah. Right. You can't pull out, because that would be admitting that everything you've done up till now has been a mistake.
Yes. Yeah. Like I interviewed Adam Kinzinger here, and for him to take that stand on the second impeachment, he has to look in the mirror and go, why didn't I do it the first time?
Yeah.
It's always hard to admit you were wrong. It's very hard to admit you were wrong when you would have to accept guilt and shame for things that you were then complicit in or responsible for.
Yeah.
And that's a bridge too far for a lot of people.
Yeah. Right. It's very difficult. It's a terrible dynamic, that the sunk costs, as we say, and that you've invested too much to ever admit that you were wrong. Yeah. So we continue to spiral.
Yeah, that's one thing we haven't figured out as a society, which is how do you give people a soft landing? So like the Romans had some Roman strategist, I'm forgetting who it was, said that you should pave your enemy a road of gold behind them to retreat. You know, that like when you force someone into a corner, they fight it out to the end. And that we're so quick to indict and criticize and paint someone as all this or all that, that we make it hard for them to jump ship.
Yes.
Or to turn.
That's right. That's right. And the ancient world had the same problem. You know, you read about changes of regime, changes of government in Athens.
Yeah.
The, you know, flip-flopping between oligarchy and democracy. And each side that took power booted out the leaders of the other side or even executed them.
Yeah.
Right? It was not possible to have a climb down to say, you know, okay, you were wrong. We accept you. There's no truth and reconciliation commissions. It's all about just destroying the other side as soon as you get power. And so Plato was very aware of that problem in Syracuse, and that was probably what was going to happen. And he tried to prevent it in his letters. And it's very, very moving, actually, to see him struggling against the prevailing Greek tendency to destroy your opponent.
Yeah, I mean, for Seneca, that decision to go to Nero and go, I'll give you all the money back, just let me leave. And then he goes, yeah, it doesn't work that way. You can't leave. That's the predicament that I think most people who, however aware they should have been earlier and however sooner we would have liked it to happen, what they're wrestling with is the incentives and the reality of like, no one's looking at Mike Pence and going, it worked out well for him. You know, like he lost his political position and then he's rejected by his own party. And then it's not like the other parties we begrudgingly respect and appreciate the decision, but we're not like, come into our tent, you know? No. So you essentially make yourself an island and nobody wants to be an island.
Right. Yeah. And what's interesting about Seneca is that in spite of his voluminous writings, he wrote probably, I don't know, we have maybe 500,000 words preserved, and there are other things that were lost. And even in his letters to Lucilius, when he's already separated himself from Nero, he never uses his pen to critique the regime.
Yes.
He only says very obliquely, these letters are like a salve, like a skin cream that I use to alleviate my rash.
Yes.
But I can't ever cure it. And that, I think, is an oblique reference to his own pangs of conscience over the collusion of the last 15 years. But he never openly attacks Nero. He never discusses the fire of Rome,
right,
which was the hugest event of his times, but reflected badly on Nero, was thought to be Nero's fault. So he just keeps it out of his writings.
Do you think he planned to do it later? Like, because he does write that searing critique of Claudius.
Yes.
And he does this safely after Claudius's death.
Right.
So maybe he planned to. But it's not like the Romans had free speech in that sense.
Right.
So, you know, today you can write your tell-all memoir and you can piss off the president and maybe they can come after you for some unrelated things, but they can't get you for just saying what's true.
Right. Yes. Well, we know that Seneca was dictating a philosophical treatise as he was dying on the orders of Nero, and presumably he had freedom of speech there. Tacitus doesn't tell us what was in it. He says this is well known to everyone, but unfortunately it wasn't preserved. So maybe there he said something more direct.
Yeah.
We know that Petronius, who went down in the same purge as Seneca, did use his last moments, his last hours, to dictate a list of Nero's sexual crimes.
Wow.
To embarrass him
Yeah.
and tell the public exactly what had been going on in the palace.
My favorite sort of last words related to Nero is there was some soldier or someone who's sentenced to death, and he's looking out over the grave right before he's about to be thrown into it. And he says, even this is not up to code.
Yes, that marvelous, hard-nosed old soldier.
We tend to think of these regimes as brutally efficient, but actually they're mostly, their hallmark is their incompetence.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very true.
The fire isn't probably his fault, but certainly how it was handled was.
Mm-hmm. And his construction of the Golden House on the ruins, his own enormously expensive pleasure palace.
Well, the tension I've been thinking about, like Seneca embodies this, but I guess Plato does too, is like, it is true that it is someone's unfortunate and terrible job because we don't singularly decide who our leaders are. Mm-hmm. There is always someone whose job is to mitigate, hey, sir, I think that's a bad idea. And they do tend to be men, so I'm not being sexist there, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. Sir, this is a bad idea. Here's all the problems with what you're about to do. Or, hey, call me if the president is about to, starts talking about nuclear weapons so I can intervene, right? You do need that person. Mm-hmm. And that to get to that place, you have to make some compromises and not always say what you think, right? Like at some level, for Mike Pence to be where he was on January 6th, Mike Pence had to degrade and compromise himself in all those other ways, right?
Yeah.
And so that does need to happen. That is true. And yet, you're probably not that person.
Right.
Right? So like the tension or the ego, I guess it's ego that makes us think that we're that person, right? The ego says, okay, yes, I'm fundamentally good inside and I'm saving myself for some moment of significance. And so that's why I'm doing all this stuff that runs contrary to what I actually believe. And it's all leading up to this big historical moment. And it's like, no, chances are you should probably just tell your coworkers that you shouldn't be doing this. Like chances are you should just speak up now, not save it for some future grand moment. And I think that's where Plato and Seneca and Cicero, all these great philosophers get themselves into trouble, which is that instead of doing and saying what was obviously right in the moment, they were telling themselves it was more important that they save themselves for some later moment.
Well, Plato, I think, was pretty forthright. I mean, he does say that he sugar-coated it a bit when talking to Dionysius, telling him he needs to sober up because Dionysius was a bad drinker, and he needs to reform his lifestyle. He needs to find friends who are reliable because they're devoted to moral virtue, not because they're getting free food and handouts from the regime.
But it does go back. I just mean, like, it's this tension between access and integrity.
Yeah.
Yes. And I got to preserve my access, even though I'm slowly compromising my integrity. That's the tension.
Yeah.
And I obviously they all failed that test at some level.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, what's missing from our society, which is present in both Greek and Roman picture, is that a philosopher who's widely respected, as both Plato and Seneca were, has automatic access because the ruler needs that legitimacy. He needs an esteemed philosopher at his court in order to appear to be an enlightened person. Yeah, we have lost that.
Also, like, for them, politely declining is not so much an option, right? The specter of death and real danger, now it's I don't want to lose my access. It's like, okay, so you don't get reelected and then you go make millions of dollars as a lobbyist or a consultant. Like, you're not actually, the downside is so much lower in today's political environment.
Yeah. Right.
And so it's even more about ego than this sort of calculated, balance between all the different factors.
Another element that we haven't talked about is the coterie of flattery, the role of flattery in an imperial court.
Yeah.
Plato talks about this in his letter to Dionysius. He says, I've become aware that a person of great wealth and power will tend to attract flatterers and toadies. Yeah. And that will inevitably corrupt his regime. Yeah. And Dionysius surrounded himself with such people. There was even a Greek term for them, the Dionysio flatterers.
Wow.
That they were a motley crew of toadies and suck-ups, and there's stories told about them that just blow the mind as to how low people were willing to go. Some of them, because Dionysius was nearsighted and apparently felt, diminished by that, they would pretend to be blind, and they'd grope around at the table for their food so that he would have to take their hand and put it to their place.
So he could feel good about himself?
So he would feel better about himself. Wow. Exactly.
See, I'm a good person. I help blind people.
Yeah, and they have it worse than I do, so I'm not really suffering so badly.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, that's just so indicative. Probably it's apocryphal.
Sure.
But it still points to the dynamic that the desire to inflate the ego of the tyrant and the rewards that you get for doing it was a huge part of the composition of these courts.
The narcissism required to think I deserve to be the most powerful person is the sort of secret weapon, and then also the inevitable undoing of those people and most leaders, right? Because first off, if you don't think you deserve to be the king or the president or the, richest person, you're probably not going to arbitrarily find yourself in that position. It's it's the thing that draws you to go do the things that would put you in that position. And then how are you, once you're there though, how are you going to get the information that you need to maintain even a tenuous connection to reality so you don't blow it all up? I mean, that's what's so striking about, Biden's debate appearance, is that up until it happened, and then even after, he seemed to think that it would go well, and that it did go well. Because who is going to tell the most powerful person in the world that they're no longer, or seemingly appear to be no longer qualified to be that person? You don't do that and keep that job. I've worked with similar personality types who are obviously much less powerful, but it's effectively a kamikaze mission. To deliver the truth that they desperately need to hear, you are destroying yourself. Because if they hear it, then their power goes away. And if they don't like your message, you go away. And so very few people are going to tell them what they need to hear. Nobody told Putin that invading Ukraine would be a bad idea, and even though it's a historical axiom that you don't invade Russia in the winter, which he does. He believes Ukraine is part of Russia. It's the one military strategy we know is that it's going to bog you down and it's going to be a disaster. Even if it somehow eke out some victory, it's just not going to go well. No, who can tell him that? Because it's a one-way ticket to the gulag.
Well, the fact that you can compare those two things is very disturbing as to what the presidency has become in this country. The fact that there wasn't an effort to deter Biden from running for a second term, and even after his debate wasn't enough of an effort in his inner circle to get him out of the race. I mean, it astonishes me.
Yeah.
It truly astonishes me, and deeply indicts our whole political system. I think the Democrats, I mean, we don't want to get too much into current politics, but the Democrats really can't move forward as a party until they acknowledge the failings of that moment. And it's only just, the reckoning has barely even begun.
Yeah, and it's obviously there's no moral equivalency there. Deciding to run for a second term when you are increasingly old is not the same as invading Ukraine.
Yeah.
But the timelessness is emperor, president, CEO, local mayor that ceases to be able to be criticized or get honest feedback or information. That is just a timeless part of the human experience, that we create the bubble that prevents the information that we desperately need from getting in.
Yeah. Yeah. And you hear a lot of commentators, people that I listen to, asking especially about current Congress, is this job so irreplaceable?
Yeah.
Couldn't you do well going back to your law firm
Sure.
or writing a book or going on the lecture circuit? Is it so addictive that you can't bear the thought of losing your job? It's astonishing.
But what's interesting, and this is where I think it does, this all seems like, oh, this only pertains to politics or whatever, but it's like, how many major figures in media turned out to be like Me Too style monsters that these people knew socially at parties, that these people had run-ins with, whether we're talking about Roger Ailes or Bill O'Reilly or Harvey Weinstein. These people had meetings with those people, or these people had power and could have said something or done something, and they didn't, because that's what we do. We go, it's somebody else's job to say something, or they say, I'm not in a position yet, right? Like we do what Seneca does, is like, I gotta wait. We come up with reasons to not do what obviously needs to be done or obviously needs to be said. And then it goes on, and then we're shocked and appalled when it all comes out. And then we're very quick to ask why other people in other industries didn't do something sooner about their own version of this same thing.
There's a wonderful story in Herodotus, to turn things back to the ancient world. The portrait Herodotus paints of Cambyses, the emperor of Persia, is really the first study of tyrants and their courts in the Greek canon. About 100 years before the events of my Plato book, but it's very much a forerunner. And Cambyses has gone mad. He's become paranoid and murderous, and he's gotten his vizier, a man named Prexaspes, to do some of his dirty work, including killing his brother to prevent him from taking the throne. And after Cambyses' death, a usurper comes to power who pretends to be the dead brother and manages to convince people that he's legitimate. And Prexaspes is the only one who knows the truth because
he did it.
Because he did the murder. And he's gone, really far along with the rulers, Cambyses and then his successor. But he finally can't go the last step when the Persians tell him he's got to go up on this tall tower and announce to all the Persians that this is the legitimate ruler. He climbs the tower and instead says, "This is a phony. I killed the real successor, and you're being ruled by a fake," and then leaps to his death.
Wow.
So in the end, he's able to tell the truth, but only at the cost of his own life.
And that's the line. We talked about this earlier. Like, everyone has the line. It's usually much later than you want it to be.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Being asked to murder the king's brother is not the line.
Right.
Being able to lie about it years later, that's the line.
Yeah.
But it's still immensely courageous. It was courageous for Seneca to ultimately turn on Nero. It was probably courageous even for him to subtly criticize Nero in his plays, and certainly it was courageous how he went out. It doesn't excuse it, but it does remind us of the infinite complexity of human beings.
I'm glad you mentioned the plays, because that's a feature of Seneca that doesn't get a lot of attention. And I think you're right that he used them to express obliquely some of his misgivings and his attacks of conscience, and especially the play Thyestes, which is a study of autocratic cruelty and sadism.
Yes.
And it's directed at a man who's portrayed as a Stoic philosopher.
Yeah.
And that play is, to my mind, autobiographical.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fact that we don't know whether the plays were put on, we don't even know if they were circulated. There are some who've even argued that Seneca didn't write them because there's no evidence in his prose works that he wrote tragedies. He never talks about it. But to my mind, they're somewhat like the Diary of Marcus Aurelius. They're a personal expression of inner anguish that he may have written mostly just for his own self.
And he was taking his life in his hands by writing them. You know, it doesn't, there's not some clear, like, legal line when you're dealing with Nero that says, if you say this, I'll kill you. But if you say it this way, I won't. I mean, there were people who were sent to death for working on biographies of Brutus.
Yes.
So even just to talk about someone who generations previous had killed an emperor was enough to get you on the wrong side of the current emperor. So for Seneca to even be fooling with some of this would have been immensely dangerous.
That's right. You hear under Tiberius that people who wrote tragedies with anti-monarchical themes got into terrible trouble.
Yeah. There's a line about George Washington that the more you read about him, the more you like him.
Mm-hmm.
And Seneca, it's kind of the opposite. And then there's some level where you cross over to the other side and it's just so complex, you just decide, I'm going to like the things I like and not think about the things I don't like so much.
Mm-hmm.
Just probably what he was doing.
Exactly so. Yeah. Yeah. He had aspirations. He doesn't ever claim to be a sage, to have attained some kind of high plane of Stoic virtue. He says he's a prophikiscans. He's on the road.
Yeah.
Even in his letters to Lucilius, when he's in his 60s, he's still on the road to virtue. And
which is also what, like, a pastor who's just been caught having extramarital affairs would say, you know, like, I too sin, you know, and it's like, okay, but, you know, it's a brilliant device also. Even though it's true and relatable, we're all on the road, it's also the perfect manipulative thing to say to excuse your abhorrent behavior.
Yes, right. So there are many ways to look at these people, both Plato and Seneca, and I don't mean my books in any way to be a takedown of either of them.
No.
They're just complex.
Yes.
And they present themselves one way in their writings, or in Plato's case, they present philosophy one way in his dialogues, and the life lived is much more complex.
Yeah, Seneca's thing about it's okay to be wealthy as a philosopher provided your money is not stained in blood.
Mm-hmm. Or
Come on.
or provided that you don't regard it as an essential to your happiness.
Yes, but I'm just saying you became rich in Nero's service.
Right.
Like, if you, like, what is a better example of money stained in blood? Like, what is there any more extreme example? Like, I can't think of one. Also, you're writing this on your estate tended by slaves.
Right.
You know, there's something. Again, we're all flawed individuals, and then there is some level where hypocrisy is so extreme that it becomes disqualifying across the board. And he flirts with that.
Yes, I agree. It would be easy to reject him.
Yes.
If one were inclined to do so. And I don't ever do that. I still think he's an admirable figure, but deeply flawed and deeply complex.
As we wrap up, one of the things you wrestled with in the book, and I think Tacitus did too, you know, Seneca's death is in some ways the perfect embodiment of Stoic philosophy. The goons come to kill him. He faces it bravely. He faces it honorably and goes to the end like a Stoic philosopher, like his hero Cato did. But as always with Seneca, there is this, is it a performance? You know, is there something false, or there's always the one eye to how this is going to be seen by other people.
That's right.
That you don't get in Marcus Aurelius.
That's right.
You get Marcus Aurelius's last words, and you don't get the sense that he is doing that to put a period on the end of Meditations.
That's right. And Seneca has an audience as he's dying.
Yeah.
He has a circle of friends around him to whom he's addressing himself, speechifying, and dictating his last treatise. So, yes, he was in the public eye right up to the end.
And Tacitus says he'd been preparing for this moment. You take that to mean not preparing for it as in we all have to face our death some way. It's like, hey, no, every fireworks show needs a grand finale.
Yes, and he had stored up a drink of hemlock to die like Socrates,
Yeah.
he must have anticipated, the end is coming and this is how I want to go. Unfortunately, it had gone bad or something. It had lost its potency, and so it didn't finish him off. He had to go to another method. He had to go to plan C.
Well, let's go check out some books.
Okay, all right.